Error. YouTube video title options. 1. How capturing U-110 broke Enigma. Then Germany made it unbreakable. 2. The Shark Blackout, when Allies lost the ability to read U-boat traffic. 3. When British sailors died stealing codebooks from sinking U-boats. 4. The 10-month blackout that nearly lost the Battle of the Atlantic. 5. How adding one rotor made Enigma unbreakable for 10 months in 1942. Brain. Video description. On May 9, 1941, British sailors from HMS Bulldog boarded the sinking German submarine U-110, racing against time and incoming seawater to steal Enigma machines and codebooks before the U-boat sank. The captured materials allowed Bletchley Park to read German naval communications for months, giving the Allies crucial intelligence in the Battle of the Atlantic. Then, on February 1, 1942, Germany introduced a new Enigma variant with 4 rotors instead of 3. Overnight, the Allies went blind. The Shark Blackout began. For 10 months, Allied intelligence could not read U-boat traffic. German submarines sank ships at rates approaching 1942's devastating totals. Convoys sailed without knowing where U-boat wolfpacks were positioned. The Atlantic supply line that sustained Britain was being strangled. At Bletchley Park, cryptanalysts worked desperately to crack the four-rotor Enigma. At sea, British sailors boarded sinking U-boats in suicidal attempts to capture the new codebooks. The race to break Shark determined whether Britain would survive. Topics covered: the May 1941 capture of U-110 and breaking of naval Enigma, Germany's introduction of four-rotor Enigma in February 1942, the 10-month Shark Blackout when Allies couldn't read U-boat traffic, HMS Petard boarding U-559 to steal codebooks in October 1942, Bletchley Park's desperate efforts to crack four-rotor Enigma, how breaking Shark saved the Battle of the Atlantic. Perfect for history. Enthusiasts interested in Battle of the Atlantic and U-boat warfare, Enigma, code-breaking and Bletchley Park, World War II, naval intelligence, cryptanalysis and signals intelligence. How intelligence determined the Atlantic battle outcome. This video uses declassified British intelligence files, U-boat war diaries, and Bletchley Park records to reveal how breaking and losing Enigma determined the Battle of the Atlantic. Das Enigma. Shark Blackout. U-110, Bletchley Park, Battle of the Atlantic, U-boats, code-breaking, cryptanalysis, naval intelligence, WY history. Krusty, text. Enigma machine, Shark Blackout, U-110 capture, Bletchley Park, Battle of the Atlantic, U-boats, code-breaking, naval intelligence, World War II cryptanalysis. Chi. Transcript 9, 267 words. At 12:28 hours on May 9, 1941, depth charges from HMS Bulldog and HMS Broadway forced German submarine U-110 to surface in the North Atlantic, 300 miles south of Iceland. The U-boat came up bow first, water streaming from its hull, men scrambling from the conning tower. Machine gun fire from the British destroyers killed some Germans as they emerged. Others jumped into the freezing water. Within minutes, U-110's crew was abandoning ship, swimming away from their submarine, expecting it to sink. Commander Joe Baker Creswell, captain of HMS Bulldog, made a decision in seconds that would change the war. The U-boat was not sinking immediately. It floated disabled, crew gone, apparently abandoned. Baker Creswell ordered a boarding party to take possession of the submarine before it went down. If they could capture documents, codebooks, or cipher equipment, the intelligence value would be enormous. Sub-Lieutenant David Baum led the boarding party, 8 sailors in a small boat rowing toward a submarine that might sink any moment, might explode if scuttling charges were set, might still have armed Germans inside. Baum climbed onto U-110's hull. He approached the conning tower cautiously, expecting gunfire. Nothing. He descended into the submarine. The interior was chaos. Water ankle-deep in some compartments. Equipment smashed by depth charge damage, papers scattered, but the submarine was not flooding catastrophically. It was staying afloat, and there were no Germans aboard. The crew had abandoned completely. Baum moved through the submarine systematically. In the radio room, he found cipher equipment still in place, an Enigma machine, codebooks, signal logs, weather codes, everything the cryptanalysts at Bletchley Park needed to read German naval communications. Baum and his men gathered everything. They passed materials up through the conning tower to sailors on deck who loaded them into boats. For 3 hours, they stripped U-110 of documents and equipment while the submarine remained afloat. Finally, as water levels inside increased, Baker Creswell ordered the boarding party to evacuate. The submarine was taken under tow toward Iceland, but during the night, U-110 finally sank. The intelligence materials were safe aboard Bulldog. The Germans believed their submarine had sunk with all hands. They never knew the British had boarded and captured cipher materials. The captured Enigma machine and codebooks reached Bletchley Park within days. The government code and cipher school Bletchley Park's official name was Britain's central code-breaking facility, located 50 miles northwest of London. Bletchley employed approximately 9,000 people by 1941, working to break access codes and ciphers. The German military Enigma was their primary target. Enigma was an electromechanical cipher machine that encrypted messages by passing electrical current through rotors that scrambled letters. The machine was portable, about the size of a typewriter, weighing 26 pounds. German military, naval, and intelligence services used Enigma machines extensively. The German Navy used a version called Kriegsmarine Enigma with additional security features. The basic Enigma machine was not unbreakable. Polish cryptanalysts had broken early Enigma versions in the 1930s. British mathematicians at Bletchley Park, led by Alan Turing, had developed methods for breaking German Army and Air Force Enigma in 1940. But the German Navy's Enigma was more secure. It used additional rotors, different procedures, and more complex key settings. Naval Enigma had resisted British cryptanalysis through 1940. The capture of U-110 provided the breakthrough. The codebooks showed how German naval operators set up Enigma machines, which rotors to use, what order, what initial positions. With this information, Bletchley's cryptanalysts could read naval Enigma. By June 1941, Bletchley was decrypting German U-boat communications regularly. The intelligence transformed the Battle of the Atlantic. Convoys could be routed around U-boat wolfpacks. Allied submarines could be positioned to ambush German supply submarines. The intelligence was codenamed Ultra and distributed to a very restricted list. Convoy commanders received routing instructions without being told the intelligence came from decrypted German signals. U-boat sinking rates declined. Allied shipping losses decreased. The Battle of the Atlantic was tilting in Britain's favor. For 8 months, ultra-intelligence from naval Enigma sustained Allied operations in the Atlantic. German U-boat command headquarters in Lorient, France, transmitted daily to submarines at sea. The transmissions gave position reports, target information, weather data, attack instructions. Bletchley intercepted and decrypted the transmissions. Allied commanders knew where U-boats were operating, where they were heading, what targets they were hunting. Then, on February 1, 1942, everything changed. German U-boat communications suddenly became unreadable. Transmissions were being intercepted as before, but Bletchley's methods for breaking the cipher stopped working. The decrypts became gibberish. Within hours, Bletchley realized what had happened. Germany had changed the cipher system. The new system was called Triton by the Germans. The British codebreakers called it Shark. It used a modified Enigma machine with 4 rotors instead of 3. The 4th rotor multiplied the cipher's complexity by a factor of 26, from approximately 150 trillion possible key settings to approximately 4 quadrillion. The additional rotor made the cipher effectively unbreakable using existing methods. For the Allies, the change was catastrophic. Ultra-intelligence from U-boat traffic disappeared overnight. Convoy routing that had relied on knowing U-boat positions now operated blind. Allied anti-submarine forces that had used Ultra to position themselves advantageously were guessing. The U-boats were invisible again. German U-boat commanders immediately noticed the difference. Allied convoys that had been avoiding wolfpacks for months suddenly sailed directly into them. Allied anti-submarine forces that had been intercepting German supply submarines were no longer in the right positions. From German perspective, Allied intelligence had been excellent and suddenly became terrible. They did not understand why, but exploited the advantage. U-boat sinking rates surged. In February 1942, U-boats sank 85 Allied ships totaling 46,000 tons. In March, 95 ships, 537,000 tons. In April, 74 ships, 41,000 tons. In May, 125 ships, 607,000 tons. In June, 104 ships, 700,000 tons. The tonnage losses were approaching the catastrophic rates from 1940-1941 before ultra-intelligence became available. The losses were unsustainable. Britain imported 60 to 70% of its food. American military supplies crossed the Atlantic in convoys. Oil from the Caribbean sustained British industry and military. Every ship sunk reduced supplies reaching Britain. If losses continued at June 1942 rates for 6 more months, Britain would face starvation and fuel shortages that might force negotiated peace with Germany. At Bletchley Park, the cryptanalysts worked desperately to break shark. The problem was mathematical and practical. The four-rotor Enigma created too many possible settings to test through brute force. Without knowing initial settings, breaking the cipher was nearly impossible, and without captured codebooks showing current settings, the cryptanalysts had no starting point. Alan Turing led the effort to develop methods for breaking four-rotor Enigma. He designed modifications to the bomb's electromechanical machines that tested possible Enigma settings. The modified bombs could handle four-rotor configurations, but required far more time to test all possibilities. Even with modified bombs, breaking a single day's shark settings might take weeks, by which time the information would be obsolete. The alternative was capturing codebooks from German submarines. If British forces could board a German U-boat and steal current shark codebooks, Bletchley could read the traffic immediately, but capturing a submarine intact was extraordinarily difficult. U-boats sank quickly when damaged. German crews were trained to destroy cipher materials before abandoning. The British needed a submarine disabled enough to prevent scuttling, but not sunk. British anti-submarine forces began attempting deliberate captures. When U-boats were detected, the goal shifted from sinking them to disabling them for capture. Depth charge attacks were calibrated to damage submarines without destroying them, force them to surface, but leave them afloat. Once surfaced, boarding parties would attempt to capture cipher materials before the submarine sank. The attempts mostly failed. U-boats sank too quickly. Crews destroyed cipher materials successfully. Weather conditions prevented boarding. Submarines exploded from damage. Through spring and summer 1942, multiple attempts to capture U-boats produced no useful intelligence materials. Meanwhile, losses mounted. The Allies were fighting the Battle of the Atlantic blind. Convoys sailed without knowing where U-boat wolfpacks were positioned. Ships were torpedoed without warning. Merchant sailors died by thousands. The mathematics were simple and brutal. If ships were sunk faster than they could be replaced, Britain would be strangled. American shipbuilding was increasing, but had not yet reached the production rates that would eventually outpace sinkings. British Admiralty estimated that if losses continued at summer 1942 rates through early 1943, Britain's import capacity would fall below minimum requirements. Food rationing would have to be increased to starvation levels. Fuel rationing would cripple industry and transportation. Military operations would be impossible to sustain. The war might be lost not through military defeat, but through economic strangulation. The pressure on Bletchley Park was immense. Every day without shark decrypts meant more ships sunk, more sailors killed, Britain closer to collapse. The cryptanalysts worked 18-hour shifts. Turing and his colleagues explored every mathematical approach to cracking four-rotor Enigma. They modified bombs. They analyzed intercepted traffic for patterns. They tested theories and hypotheses. Nothing produced reliable breaks. On October 30th, 1942, a breakthrough came not from mathematics, but from blood. HMS Petard, a British destroyer operating in the eastern Mediterranean, detected German submarine U-5559. Petard and 2 other destroyers attacked with depth charges. U-5559 was forced to surface after 16 hours of sustained attack. The submarine came up at night, damaged, unable to dive again. Petard's captain, Commander Mark Thornton, ordered boarding party prepared. The submarine was sinking slowly but still afloat. If cipher materials could be captured before U-559 went down, the intelligence would be invaluable. 3 volunteers formed the boarding party: Lieutenant Anthony Fasson, able seaman Colin Grazier, and 16-year-old canteen assistant Tommy Brown. Fasson and Grazier jumped into the water and swam to U-559. They climbed onto the hull and descended into the submarine. German crew had abandoned ship. The interior was flooding but not yet completely submerged. Fasson and Grazier moved through the submarine, searching for cipher materials. They found codebooks and cipher documents in the radio room. They passed materials up through the conning tower to Brown, who ferried them to Petard's boat. For 20 minutes, they worked inside the sinking submarine, water levels rising, knowing the U-boat could go down any moment. They retrieved codebooks, signal logs, and cipher documents. Brown called down that the submarine was sinking fast. Fasson and Grazier needed to evacuate immediately. Brown climbed out and jumped clear. Fasson and Grazier remained inside, attempting to retrieve more materials. Suddenly, U-559 went down. The submarine sank stern first in seconds. Fasson and Grazier were trapped inside. They drowned. Brown survived. The captured materials reached Bletchley Park in November. The codebooks were for Shark, the four-rotor naval Enigma. The documents showed current key settings. With this information, Bletchley cryptanalysts could break Shark traffic. On December 13, 1942, Bletchley Park decrypted its first Shark message in 10 months. The Shark blackout was over. Ultra-intelligence on U-boat positions and operations resumed. By January 1943, Bletchley was reading Shark regularly. Convoy routing based on ultra-intelligence resumed. Allied anti-submarine forces could be positioned using intelligence rather than guesswork. The effect on the Battle of the Atlantic was immediate and dramatic. U-boat sinking rates in the first quarter of 1943 declined compared to late 1942. Allied shipping losses decreased significantly. In March 1943, U-boats sank 108 ships, but lost 41 submarines, the highest monthly U-boat loss rate of the war. The exchange rate had shifted. Germany was losing submarines faster than they could be replaced, while Allied shipbuilding was producing vessels faster than U-boats could sink them. By May 1943, German U-boat command withdrew submarines from the North Atlantic temporarily due to unsustainable losses. The Battle of the Atlantic had turned decisively in the Allies' favor. Ultra-intelligence was not the only factor. Improvements in radar, long-range aircraft, escort techniques, and shipbuilding all contributed. But Ultra's return after the Shark blackout was critical. Without the ability to read U-boat communications, the other advantages would have been less effective. The 10 months of the Shark blackout, February through November 1942, had been the most dangerous period of the Battle of the Atlantic. During those months, U-boats sank over 100 Allied ships totaling over 6 million tons. Tens of thousands of merchant sailors died. The losses nearly strangled Britain's supply lines. If the Shark cipher had remained unbroken for another 6 months, Britain might have faced conditions requiring negotiated peace. The breakthrough came at terrible cost. Lieutenant Fasson and able seaman Grazier died retrieving the codebooks from U-559. Their sacrifice was recognized posthumously. Both received the George Cross, Britain's highest civilian decoration for gallantry. Tommy Brown received the George Medal, but the true nature of their mission remained classified for decades. The families were told the men died attempting to save the submarine crew. The truth that they died stealing cipher materials was not revealed until the 1970s, when Bletchley Park operations were declassified. The story of U-110 and U-559 illustrated how breaking Enigma required more than mathematics. Cryptanalysis was essential but insufficient. Breaking the cipher required captured materials, codebooks, key settings, machine components. Obtaining those materials required sailors boarding sinking submarines in conditions that often killed them. The combination of mathematical brilliance at Bletchley Park and physical courage at sea determined whether Enigma could be broken. The German Navy never realized Enigma was compromised. German investigations after the war reviewed whether cipher security had been maintained. They concluded Enigma was secure. They attributed Allied intelligence successes to direction-finding technology, aerial reconnaissance, interrogation of prisoners, and espionage. They never suspected cryptanalysis. The psychological difficulty of accepting that Enigma was broken prevented German authorities from considering it seriously. German submarine commanders continued using Enigma through the end of the war, despite mounting evidence that security was compromised. Allied forces seemed to know U-boat positions too often. Convoys avoided wolfpacks too consistently. Allied anti-submarine forces appeared in unexpected locations too frequently. German naval officers recognized these patterns but attributed them to direction-finding technology and Allied patrol efficiency rather than cipher compromise. The assumption that Enigma was secure blinded German authorities to the reality. They believed the mathematics made Enigma unbreakable. Four-rotor Enigma had quadrillions of possible settings. No enemy could test that many possibilities. Therefore, the cipher must be secure. The logic seemed irrefutable. The conclusion was wrong, but confirming the error would require admitting catastrophic security failure. The irony was that Germany had broken British naval codes during the same period. German codebreakers read British convoy routing messages regularly. The intelligence allowed U-boats to position themselves along convoy routes. But British naval code security improved in 1943, and German success in reading British codes declined. By 1944, German naval intelligence was largely blind to Allied communications, while Bletchley Park continued reading German naval traffic. The asymmetry meant Allies knew where German U-boats were operating, while Germans did not know where Allied convoys were sailing. The intelligence imbalance was decisive. Allied convoys could avoid U-boat concentrations. Allied anti-submarine forces could position themselves to intercept U-boats. The operational advantage was overwhelming. Post-war analysis concluded that ultra-intelligence from naval Enigma shortened the Battle of the Atlantic by at least 12 months, possibly 18 months. Without Enigma decrypts, Allied forces would have eventually achieved superiority through numerical advantages in ships and aircraft, but the timeline would have been extended, more ships would have been sunk, more sailors would have died. Britain would have endured longer periods of severe rationing and supply shortages. The 10-month shark blackout demonstrated what the Battle of the Atlantic would have been like without Ultra. The losses from February through November 1942 showed the cost of fighting blind. When Ultra resumed in December 1942, the difference was measurable in ship sinking rates and U-boat loss rates. The intelligence mattered. The human cost of breaking Enigma was measured in lives of cryptanalysts who worked themselves to exhaustion at Bletchley Park and sailors who died boarding submarines. Alan Turing's contributions to breaking Enigma are well documented. Less well known are the dozens of other mathematicians, linguists, and analysts who worked at Bletchley Park under intense pressure for years. Many suffered nervous breakdowns. Some died young from stress-related illnesses. Their contributions remained classified for decades after the war. The sailors who boarded U-110, U-559, and other submarines faced immediate life-or-death decisions. Descend into a sinking submarine knowing it might go down any moment. Search for documents and equipment while water rises. Choose whether to evacuate or attempt to retrieve more materials. Fasten and Grazier chose to stay and retrieve more materials. They drowned when U-559 sank. Their choice saved thousands of lives by enabling Bletchley Park to break shark. The strategic lesson was that signals intelligence required combining multiple capabilities. Cryptanalysis alone could not break Enigma without captured materials. Captured materials alone could not sustain intelligence without cryptanalytic capability to exploit them. The British succeeded because they combined mathematical expertise at Bletchley Park with operational capability to capture cipher materials at sea. The technical lesson was that cipher security depended on more than mathematical complexity. Four-rotor Enigma was mathematically strong. The Germans were correct that testing all possible settings was impractical, but the cipher was still breakable if codebooks could be captured or if operational procedures were sloppy. German operators sometimes used predictable key settings. They sometimes transmitted messages with formulaic openings that provided cribs for cryptanalysis. These weaknesses allowed Bletchley Park to break the cipher even when captured codebooks were not available. The operational lesson was that intelligence advantages had to be exploited carefully to avoid revealing their existence. The Allies used ultra-intelligence cautiously. Convoys were not always routed around U-boat wolfpacks because consistent avoidance would suggest Allied intelligence was too good. Allied forces sometimes allowed U-boats to attack to maintain the deception that German communications were secure. The balance between using intelligence and protecting its source was delicate. The story of U-110, the Shark Blackout, and U-559 was declassified gradually beginning in the 1970s. British authorities had kept Bletchley Park operations secret for 30 years after the war. The justification was that signals intelligence techniques developed during World War II remained relevant during the Cold War. Revealing how Enigma was broken might compromise ongoing operations. When the story finally became public, historians gained access to documents describing Bletchley Park's work, the capture operations, and the cryptanalytic methods. The full scope of Ultra's contribution to Allied victory became clear. Eisenhower stated after the war that Ultra shortened the war by at least a year. Other military leaders credited Ultra with saving hundreds of thousands of lives by enabling more effective operations. The families of Fasson and Grazier finally learned why their relatives had died. The official story had been that the men attempted to save German submarine crew. The truth was they died stealing cipher materials. The deception had been necessary during the war to protect sources, but decades later, the truth could be revealed. The families were told their relatives' sacrifice had helped win the Battle of the Atlantic. The Shark Blackout from February through November 1942 represented the most dangerous period for Allied shipping since the war began. 10 months without the ability to read U-boat traffic, 10 months of sailing blind, 10 months when German submarines held the advantage. The blackout nearly cost Britain the war through economic strangulation. The breaking of four-rotor Enigma in December 1942, enabled by codebooks captured from U-559 at the cost of 2 lives, restored Allied intelligence capabilities and turned the Battle of the Atlantic decisively in the Allies' favor. The war that had been fought partially blind became a war where Allies could see German intentions while Germans remained blind to Allied knowledge. The cipher that Germany believed unbreakable had been broken through combination of mathematical genius and physical courage. The machines that encrypted German military communications had been captured from sinking submarines by sailors who risked and sometimes lost their lives. The codes that protected German naval operations had been cracked by cryptanalysts who worked until exhaustion under pressure to save Britain from starvation. This was how Enigma was broken, not just through mathematics, through blood, through sailors boarding submarines that were sinking beneath them, through cryptanalysts working 18-hour shifts desperate to break ciphers before Britain starved, through the combination of intellectual brilliance and physical courage that determined who would control the Atlantic and therefore who would win the war. The capture of U-110 provided the breakthrough in 1941. The Shark Blackout in 1942 nearly lost everything. The capture of U-559 in October 1942 saved Britain, and all of it remained secret for 3 decades because the methods used to break Enigma were too valuable to reveal even after the war ended.